Are the Vikings getting their due in the national media? What is going on with Josh Allen? And how can the Vikings fix some of their biggest problems? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast. It's Twitter Tuesday.
You like that? 1, 2, 3. You like it?
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely, online, and available to people worldwide. And they have a special offer for Locked On Vikings listeners. Get 10% off of your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Welcome to Twitter Tuesday, everybody. This is the show where I answer your questions. If you have questions for me, you can always ask me at Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings on Twitter. You can send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com or fill out the Google form in the show notes, or you leave a YouTube comment if you are watching on YouTube. So, diving right in, first one comes from Andrew Marrero, who asks, it seems the Vikings only get judged by performance on primetime games. Vikings lose a primetime game to an undefeated team, get looked down on, but the Bengals lose to a Brissett-led Browns team on Monday night, and yet most will have Bengals above the Vikings. I guess my question is, what do the Vikings have to do to be acknowledged? Okay, so my first instinct here is I don't really care about power rankings. They got boring to me many years ago, and they just aren't fun, so I don't really talk about them. But a lot of people think that they are fun, and go ahead, have your fun. But I don't think I've seen the Bengals above the Vikings in a lot of places in a power ranking setting, and I think getting kind of solved without Jamar Chase. Like, I actually think the Bengals are in a pretty rough spot right now. I talked about that on Locked On NFL, which you can find me on Tuesdays as well. So I don't know about like that comparison. I think they're in some trouble if they can't figure out how to have an offense without Jamar Chase. Because they're going to be missing him for like a lot of weeks in their important games. In terms of media, I think, look, the Vikings have had a national spotlight moment with like the big Kirko Chains thing. Kirk Cousins was on the Manning cast. There's, everybody's got a Viking segment on all the national shows. So I don't know what you want from a national media, but sometimes I think as fans, and every fan base does this, look at any SB Nation team-specific blog. They will insist on that blog that the media hates their team. It goes everywhere. The media hates the Patriots. They hate the Cowboys. Everybody hates the Cowboys, right? The media just hates us. The media just hates the Viking. Always, right? It's just a universal sports fandom thing. So I don't know if that's the case. And most power rankings that I've seen have the Vikings in, if not close to, the top 5. And like, when you think about it, can you name like 10 teams that the Vikings wouldn't be favored against? I don't think you can. And I don't think you could even get close. So I think if you wanted to be like really pessimistic, you'd call them like a top 8 team, I guess. And like, that would be the negative take. And I think most people, most places would agree with that. So I think they have. I think having that viral, like really likable moment on the plane, dancing around with Kirk and all the chains and all that stuff, I think that's what they need for that. Magic Skullbus asks, knowing who Case Keenum is at quarterback, if he plays, do we match up favorably, or are we about to get 7-heavened? So this is the other interesting thing, huh? So Josh Allen may not play in this game against the Bills upcoming. This is a developing situation as I'm recording this, but various grapevines, whisperings, and then eventually like the actual traditional media rap sheet, Chris Mortensen, all those guys eventually came out and said that Josh Allen is dealing with a problem with a ligament in his elbow called UCL, and that is a ligament he's injured before. He missed about a month his rookie year with it. And that is a ligament that pitchers will tear and need Tommy John surgery. So if you're a baseball fan, that might send your heart into a spiral. hearing the word Tommy John. But that is the procedure that takes, and that will take a pitcher out for like 16 months. We got to see. I think there's like MRIs and tests and stuff to see how extensive Allen's injury is. And if it's mild, he actually could play through it. So it's very much all about the extent of that injury. We don't know that right now, at least it's not public. Maybe the Bills know it, but who knows? So we just kind of have to sit and watch that. But to answer Magic School Bus's question, Case Keenum has a lot in common with Taylor Heineke. They both have, I'm going to go with subpar for a professional quarterback, arms. They both have that sort of improvisational, that run around gene, that schoolyard kind of thing, but they both are kind of only schoolyard. But I think if you can keep him in the pocket and if you can man cover most of what the Bills have downfield, I don't think you get seven heavened. But that's a pretty tall order because they got some dudes. One of those dudes is Stephon Diggs. You're not going to put, a Caleb Evans on him and cover that one-on-one. So it's definitely a challenging game. It brings me to the next one, which comes from Gabe, who asks if the Vikings beat the Bills and it's at least mildly convincing. By the way, Gabe asked this before any Josh Allen stuff broke. So Gabe was assuming it would be full strength Bills. If the Vikings beat the Bills and it's at least mildly convincing, as in there's like a complete lapse on the Bills, even if we win by one last play, but it's hard fought win, that's convincing in my opinion. What then? Are we contenders? So I think I'm going to reiterate what I said about this a couple weeks ago. They are contending. You might not think they deserve to contend, and there might even be an argument there, right? That things are fake and that these wins are sort of fraudulent and there's backup quarterbacks and look at the bad teams and all that stuff. But man, they're 7-1. They're going to win the NFC North. It's statistically becoming like, if they don't win the NFC North, it's one of the most amazing things to ever happen in a football season. That means they're going to have a home playoff game. If they lock up the 2 seed, they'll have 2 home playoff games. They'll probably be favored in at least one of those games. So you're going to be favored in the playoffs. Favored in playoff games. To me, that's contending. So I don't know, call them as fake as you want, but they already will contend. Now, can they take advantage of that? Well, we got all sorts of questions about that, right? About how real they are and stuff. But that's contending, if you ask me. Skull Actuary says, what can the Vikings do to shore up their interior O-line? Will anything be done about it? If you're talking about like roster-wise, it's a little late for that. Trade deadline's over. Starting guards aren't just walking around on the street. The best move they can make to me is to start having a week-to-week competition with Ed Ingram and Chris Reed. That's, I think, the most impactful thing they can do. Otherwise, you just kind of call protections to protect the interior. They did a lot of that against Washington, where you put both the tackles on an island and you had the interior kind of wall with itself. And that did mitigate some. So you can kind of do that. You can do moving pockets. You can do rollouts and stuff. Your kind of classic O-line hiding scheme stuff. But personnel-wise, they've sort of committed to going with the guys that they're going with. I got a whole bunch more questions for you on this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetterHelp, Therapy Online. BetterHelp is not like a crisis line or self-help or anything like that. It is just a tool to help you get set up with a therapist that is good for you. And therapy is something, especially if you're of the older generations, can kind of have a bit of a stigma around it. To me, therapy is just going to the gym, but for your mental health instead of your physical health. And it's an important step in maintenance. And it's not just for, it's great if you have like personal life problems and you really have something you have to work out. But for me, it's also just a way to sort of find a better version of you. And the right therapist can help guide you to just finding a better version of yourself. And I think everybody should want that. If you do go to BetterHelp and you get set up with a therapist and you don't like that therapist, try another one. You'd be surprised how different therapists are. And if it's super common for somebody to get a therapist, they don't click, and then they scrap the whole idea entirely. Keep trying people. Eventually, you're going to find somebody you click with, and you're going to find what it's worth. So get unstuck with BetterHelp. Learn more and save 10% off of your first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Also, check out Locked On Sports Today. Covers all things sports in a daily podcast just like this one. Next one comes from Kirk Chain Enjoyer. Says, what coverages did you specifically see on plays where Jefferson succeeded and plays where he was bottled up? I know St. Just was following him, but does that imply simple man coverage, or did he have help? And if so, what kinds? That's very much a play-to-play question, and I don't sit there and like chart coverages on percentages and stuff because there are services that do that. So if you want to look that up, go pay them. So I don't have a specific answer, but I think a lot of the problems in the pass game were protection related, not necessarily coverage related. I don't think they found some schematic answer to Justin Jefferson. I think St. Jude's did an admirable job, and then I think Jonathan Allen just like got to Kirk Cousins and ruined a whole bunch of plays. It's also just the ebb and flow of a game. If you make Justin Jefferson the deep post and they're in single high and they have a post safety, it's like he's just never going to get that throw. Like that's just kind of how football is. And that you're going to have just some level of those plays. So that's why, even though he's the first read, you want to get it to Jefferson every play. That's just going to account for some number of them. Jordan Barrett says, what did you see in the Arizona game that got a run game going that wasn't replicated against Washington? The cop-out answer is that Washington's defensive line is a lot better. And I probably undersold that when I was previewing the game. Like, that's a mistake that I made, that I didn't really factor that in. Because I kind of said, hey, look, they figured out how to run the ball on this base package thing. That's great. Arizona's defensive line played pretty poorly. And I think there were members of Washington's D-line that played poorly, but also some members that played like at an elite level. And that had a lot to do with it. And then more plays than you think, and this actually goes for the past two, were just wrecked by TJ Hawkinson. And he made a whole bunch of protection busts, and I think he ran the wrong route a couple times in a way that would be like a huge concern and catastrophe if he hadn't been on the team for like 5 days. But it's like, you're going to forgive all that, right? Like, okay, yeah, you like struggled and you did the wrong thing a whole bunch. You're clearly getting up to speed, like in real time. It's okay. But I think you can chalk like 6 or 7 plays up to some mistake like that, which does lead me to Thera's question. Given Hawkinson played 90% of snaps after being with the team for just 4 days, should I start calling him the greatest tight end of all time, or should I wait till next week? Wait till next week. Let's see if he can stop doing those things. It's very excusable week 1, less excusable week 2, and by week 3, you would expect that stuff to stop happening. At least that's the way I'm going to kind of think of it. So we'll see how much less of it we get. Probably played him too much. I think that's a little bit too much to ask. And I think it was proven to be too much to ask because of how much he's screwed up the assignment. I am going to either do a Patreon post or article, or maybe both, about that, because I find it really interesting. Not to crap on the guy, but I just find it really interesting when you can kind of pick out like, this is what went wrong on the play, this is what it's supposed to look like, and this is what he did instead. If you want to find film breakdown stuff like that, you can find me on patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. Scooter says, if I remember right, your draft evaluation of Darrisaw, mentioned that he had some type of kick slide issue, finishing problems, and was susceptible to speed rushers. Has he resolved all of these issues? Okay. So some percentage of this is me just being wrong. Like, there is sometimes the finishing thing, I wasn't wrong about that. Everybody saw that. That was a genuine issue where he would let up on the play in college before the play ended. He would stop. He would not play through the whistle. He wouldn't play to the whistle, to the point where it actually got him beat sometimes. He would let up on a block, and then his man that he had totally locked up would shed him and go and make a tackle because he thought the play was over, but it wasn't. I don't think that's happened once in the NFL, and honestly, his finishes are not only good, but funny. They're so good. I mean, he's throwing people out of the club. He makes them, somebody replied to a clip I posted on Twitter, like, he makes NFL caliber athletes look like 7th graders. It's hilarious. It's an amazing strength of his. That was a weakness that bothered me a lot. So that just got better, like instantly. And that's awesome, right? It was a concern, no longer is one. Great. No notes. The kick slide thing, some of that was me just misidentifying the set he was trying to take. And so that's just me messing up, right? And look, if anybody is trying to give you draft takes and they're not willing to admit when they're wrong about stuff, you shouldn't trust those draft takes. I mean, you shouldn't trust mine either. I'm wrong all the time, but you got to be able to admit it. Nobody's good at the draft. NFL teams aren't good at the draft. Nobody in the entire world is good at the draft. So you're going to be wrong all the time. And identifying where that is how you get better. So that's no shame for me in that. The actual like depth on kick slide thing is something that I saw. Um, I don't think that that's necessarily gotten better, but it hasn't turned out to be as much of a problem as I thought. So when you kick slide, that's when tackles try to get a lot of depth for like a speed rusher trying to get around him. And Darrisaw, I thought he flipped his hips too easily, because when somebody gets past you, you got to flip your hips and just put them up field. And I'm like, man, guys in the NFL are a lot faster. I don't know if you're going to be able to get away with that. And he just can. And okay, well, I guess you could just live like that, and that's sustainable then. All right, sure, fine. Derek McKenzie asks, Evans came in and played well for Dantzler. I thought, was that an illusion? Plus, do you foresee a Hawkinson package where he is split wide in a goal line situation? Pretty quick. No, I thought Evans played a pretty good game. Played good 3/4 of a game. Actually covered Terry McLaurin a couple times. I think that's genuinely something to watch. Good job. One game does not a future make. That can be a fluke. Very small sample, so something to just keep your eye on. And then second package, yes. Hawkinson split, so tight end split wide on the goal line. Tight end split wide is like a really normal thing to do. It happens all the time. It can be a really good man zone indicator. So if you split him out wide and a linebacker goes, that kind of tells you, okay, the only reason they'd ever put a linebacker in a cornerback position is because it's man coverage, right? Because that's the matchup. And if a cornerback goes out there with him, it's kind of his own indicator. With Hawkinson, he can run routes split out wide. And I am pretty sure there were times where he was just split out wide. Goal line specifically, I don't think I saw that this game, but yeah, that would be a totally normal thing to do. MN Hopes says, these last 2 weeks, we have seen just how effective a match zone system can be. Now that this appears to be the predominant defense the Vikings are playing, what weaknesses will the Vikings have to account for that they didn't under spot zone? So the trade-off here, spot zone is a little bit more forgiving when you mess up. And they messed up a lot. So you got to play the one, and it's not like a good play when you mess up, right? Like you're still going to give up all those passes over the middle. You're probably really frustrated by. In a match zone, that gets a lot worse when you mess up. And so that's the trade-off, right? Match zone is going to be tighter coverage and harder throws and more incompletions, and generally will be better once you can run it soundly. And most NFL defenses can, and that's why spot drop zone is pretty out of fashion. Because you don't need, in high school, you run all kinds of cover 2 and spot drop zone, because those kids might not be able to do good pass-offs and stuff. By the time you get to the NFL, players can, so most zone teams will run match zone nowadays. In match zone, however, if you mess that up, you're carrying a guy all the way. So a coverage bust turns into a long 70-yard touchdown, whereas in a spot drop zone, if you get to the wrong landmark or if you don't pass people off, there's a throwing window for a 15-yard play over the middle, but that's better than we just totally forgot to cover a guy and he's streaking down the field for a touchdown. Now, I've got a few more questions here. I want to make sure I get to them all. There's some really good ones in the back part of this mailbag. But first, let me talk to you about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Daily fantasy is not my jam usually, but Prize Picks is. I don't want to come up with a whole lineup to play daily fantasy and then try to enter a pool of 6,000 people. Let me just go like player by player. And on Prize Picks, it's just you versus the house. So it's a more than less than game. You versus the house in anything. Can be NFL, NBA, it can be golf, college football, soccer, esports, anything. Go to prizepicks.com or get the app now. You can get 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code locked on. That means if you deposit 100, you get 100 slapped right on top of it for free. Deposit 50, get 50, etc. with your first entry. If you enter promo code locked on at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Moving on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. The next question, a couple interesting ones here, come from Dylan. The first one says, is it fair to say that now that we're halfway into the season that Kevin O'Connell was semi-right about being able to get to Kirk? Hasn't been his best season by any means, but it seems like he's playing a lot freer than he was in past seasons, barring the Eagles game. Definitely freer, and kind of for better or worse. The word I've said is it's greedier, which maybe isn't the best word because it kind of has a negative connotation, but I like that he's been greedier. I think greedy is better because Cousins hasn't been greedy enough. He is statistically not performing as well as he did the last couple years. But I think that is emblematic of a good thing, because he's not taking as many easy completions for what I'm going to call empty yards, like getting 6 yards on 2nd and 15. There is an EPA value to that, right? You get almost half of it back. Maybe you're even happy with that. But like, ooh, you set up a 3rd and 9. I feel like Cousins has been a little bit less eager to get to the completion and a little bit more persistent in finding bigger plays. And that's the way he's been putting it, like after games and in pressers, is, trying to find plays, trying to find yards, and even finding plays with his legs and finding opportunities. Sometimes you got to search in a play a little bit. Sometimes it's not going to be first read or second read or even in the progression. Sometimes you have to reset in the pocket a little bit. He's been way more willing and loose in doing that. And not even improvisational, just a little more persistent. I think he was too willing to toss plays in the trash if they didn't go straight by the book. And that's not happening anymore, but it's going to lead to fewer completions. He leads the league in throwaways right now because he's going through progressions more instead of just taking the first read if it's a completion, regardless of if it's a good completion or not. That's a good thing. I like that. It's just not going to bear out statistically, but like, who cares if you're winning the game, right? Of course, you would take less stats for a win. Everybody would. Supreme Gentleman says, you talked about looking for a leader of men first. And my ranking on this, 2019 was the best Kirk season, and I think this one right now looks like it's second. Supreme Gentleman says, you talked about looking for a leader of men. Firstly, when trying to find a new head coach this offseason, how do you think O'Connell has performed as a leader of men? Hard to argue, right? They seem to really be responding to him. The culture that he wanted to install is clearly there. Going to be a little bit hard to answer this before they go on a losing streak. Eventually, there will be a losing streak. It happens to everybody. Let's see what it looks like then, and then we'll talk. But like that's really the test of the culture. But hard to complain so far. DJ asks, who has the most receiving yards for the rest of the year? Jalen Reagor, Naylor, or a mystery other receiver who may have made a famous one-handed catch? Well, I don't think David Tyree is in football anymore, so I have just simply no idea who you could possibly be talking about. Probably Reagor. We'll see. I don't know. Thielen's been a little banged up too, so Reagor might get more snaps if that re-aggravates or if he ever has to miss time. OBJ would be very cool. I don't have any reason to believe that he would be a Viking any more than I would believe he'll be something else. I don't know when he'll be healthy. So conversation for another day with Odell Beckham. So I'll go with bird in hand versus two in the bush. I'll go with Reagor. Chris asks, do you think it's easier to root for Cousins or to root against Aaron Rodgers this year? Which do you think is more fun? I mean, I'm always going to be rooting for the Vikings more than I'm going to be rooting against the Packers. As much, I mean, when the Packers are on, in prime time, of course, I'm rooting for the other team. Yeah, I want the same with the Bears, same with the Lions. But just rooting for Packer misery, I will revel in, or revel. I don't know what the emphasis is in Packer misery, but Vikings games results actually have the influence on my emotions that they should for a fan. I know a lot of Vikings fans will root against the Packers just as fervently as they will root for the Vikings. I'm just not one of those guys. Cho asks, in terms of leadership and team camaraderie, how much should we read into a team captain reigning MVP, alternative medicine aficionado, and definitely immunized? He's not inoculated, immunized leader, naming all of his injured teammates by number only and not using any other human names. That's not that weird of a thing to call people by their numbers in football. That you'll hear coaches talk like that too. I think that's just a colloquialism of football and not necessarily a dehumanizing thing. But because of all the context surrounding Aaron Rodgers and the things he's been saying in the media, I mean, listen to Locked On Packers. A, it's delicious. B, Peter's doing a great job of keeping all of it straight. It's in that context, yeah, that's not a great look. But I do think it's a little more normal than it seems from the outside for a football team. DJ H, different DJ, asks, what is your favorite thing about Kirk Cousins you have learned this week? I think the coolest thing that we learned about Cousins is how he responds to getting the wind knocked out of him. I don't think we've seen that before with Cousins. He's with that big old flak jacket. He's never had to go out for a play because he got hit so hard. And he came back and responded and played really well, which I have to shout out my stepmother for making that observation. I didn't really clock that until she pointed it out. Another Luke asks, what are your thoughts on the ISM release at this point? I thought it was the wrong call at the time. Thought they could have trimmed elsewhere, but when they picked up Rager, but seeing how he has bounced around since, does he have bigger issues than we realized? Yeah, I guess. I thought he had a lot of potential, but I don't know. He's going to be on practice squads for a while. Might be one of those guys that gets an elevation every once in a while. It was a punt returner move, though. They wanted Smith Marset to be a punt returner. I mean, what I saw in camp looked pretty good. And I kind of am trusting that more than I'm going to trust any statistical stuff or any, production projection based on like test scores or whatever. I just thought he was playing all right as a wide receiver. I thought he looked like he could be a fourth guy. Not a starter, not a cut guy, but it looked like he could be a backup. I don't know. Maybe I'm just wrong about that. That's certainly is possible because a lot of teams seem to have a consensus that he is not worthy of being put on a roster. And maybe I just disagree. I think it's perfectly valid to disagree. And I also could just be objectively wrong. Guess we won't know until he sticks on a team. Matt has the last one of the day, and it's not a question. I think it's just an interesting topic. He said the whole trading within division thing seems simple. When you trade in division, you double down. You're either winning twice, better team with a weaker division opponent, or losing twice, all in relative terms. So the type of GM that will trade in division is one with confidence in their judgment. I think that's a great way to think about it, by the way. And I think Kwesi has confidence in his process, confidence that he's winning his average trade, so making lots of in-division trades will create more bang for his buck. Avoidance of in-division trades is a real market inefficiency. A lot of analytics people would agree with you like super hard, by the way. In addition to the above, you should have more information about your division opponents than any other team in the league, and that should lead you to better identify opponents in division. It's not a question, but an interesting thought and worth addressing. I agree with this. I think this is a good way to put it. In-division trades will punish you a lot worse if they don't work out. But look at like the Packers right now. We got 2 second-round picks. They got Christian Watson. They are not happy with him. And then he got hurt anyways. And this TJ Hawkinson thing, if it works out the way it worked out against Washington, which if anything, it should get better because he made a whole bunch of mistakes that probably won't continue as he like learns the playbook more. Then like that punishes them even more. I wouldn't say it's worth like 2 for 1. It's like 1.3 for 1 probably because you play him twice. It's only 2 of your 17 games, but they're also the teams that you're, fighting for division crown for. And that means home playoffs. That's huge, right? So yeah, I think that's a great way to think of it. Not that trading within the division should be a banned thing. And I think of it like a banned thing a lot because it just doesn't happen very often. But Kwesi seems to embrace it, as a sort of higher stakes version of the same thing. It's if you bet $20 or $40 on a hand of blackjack, your odds are the same. You're still playing blackjack. You just have more skin in the game. And yeah, that's a good way to put it. So good on you, Matt. Tomorrow I will talk about some things. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about the TJ Hawkinson protection bust stuff that I wanted to talk about. Again, there's nobody's mad about this, but I just think it's neat to analyze, even though it's technically a negative thing, but, I want to nerd out a little, maybe a Caleb Evans stuff. I don't know. We'll talk about something like that tomorrow. We'll also keep tabs on that Josh Allen situation. So make sure you stay tuned. I will see you all for all of that. And as always, Skull.